These unconventional times require unconventional conversations. Listen in as your host, Richard Gordon, engages in one-on-one conversations with numerous leaders, elected officials, politicians, and others to learn what's happening in your state, on the Hill, and across America. Now, here's the host of Unconventional Times, Richard Gordon. And now, join us for part 2 of Richard Gordon's conversation with Frank Lowenstein on Unconventional Times.
You very quickly mentioned something on all our minds. We woke up, I don't know, what was it, January 3rd, and the United States was blowing up bases in Venezuela and kidnapped the president of the state, kidnapped President Nicolas Maduro, and brought him to New York, and he is now in prison in New York and is under indictment. Okay, that ostensibly that is because he is a drug kingpin and has been selling drugs to the United States. I referenced earlier in my introduction that we just let the president of Honduras go, who was a convicted drug pen. How do you square all of this? What happened in Venezuela? What was the point? What was the president of the United States trying to prove? And what's the world think? Take any of those questions, Frank. It doesn't matter. Any order.
So just as a brief preamble, interpreting Trump is I don't know if there's any rhyme or reason to any of this, honestly, but
you're a diplomat.
What was most surprising to me about it was that Trump went in there and said, this guy's a drug dealer, which is obviously hypocritical, right? And we want all their oil, right? And again, we had a democratically elected leader, Mikado, who'd won the Nobel Peace Prize, right? And again, she wasn't technically allowed to run herself, but her proxy, because the Venezuelan government wouldn't let her do it, but her proxy won, and she effectively had a mandate from 70% of Venezuelans. What we would have done in the past, right, when we were better at lying, if nothing else, was to say, we're here to put the duly elected leader of Venezuela in power where she belongs, right? That's the U.S., using our military force to advance our values, right? We believe, or last time I checked anyway, democracy is one of the things that, America stands for around the world. So we had an opportunity to go in there and at least say, this is what we're doing, right? And all Trump said instead was, we want their oil. Again, Richard, it's something that doesn't make any sense. The Venezuelan oil fields will take decades, right, before anybody's pulling any oil. All the U.S. oil companies came and said, hey, we can't, this is going to take forever. And by the way, they know there's a Democratic president coming in. There may be it's a really unsafe environment. So we're not going to get anything out of that, right? And all we did was effectively tell the world, we may go kill your leader or kidnap them or whatever the case, if we don't like them, right? And if you have something that we want, we might just go kill your leader and take your stuff. And again, what if we got anything out of it? I would at least understand that we're getting nothing out of this Venezuela thing.
Was it to appease the American oil executives? I mean, the American oil executives don't seem particularly thrilled about this either.
Richard, we're the world's largest oil producer right now. There's so much shale, fracking oil to be derived from the Permian Basin in Texas now. I mean, it's like
in Pennsylvania.
We don't need any more oil. The problem is there's too much oil on the market, and it's lowering costs, right? So that argument made no sense. Honestly, I think Trump. First of all, I think Marco Rubio, right? And I worked with him in the Senate. He was on the Foreign Relations Committee, and he cares about Cuba more than anything.
Of course, it's Cuba.
So I saw that as an indirect shot at Cuba. And by the way, I would put a marker on Cuba for what may be in Trump's sights next. I could easily see us trying to overthrow that regime and sort of, we could probably annex Cuba a lot more easily than we could Greenland or NATO. So anyways,
I want the paint concession when we take over Cuba. I think whoever gets the paint concession is going to make a fortune.
Yeah, I mean, it's an extraordinary place. So in any event, I think there was a bank shot on Cuba there that Rubio was driving, which may come into sort of much more direct action going forward. But yeah, beyond that, I honestly think at some level, after Israel started bombing the Iranian nuclear facilities, but obviously they weren't able to. They didn't have the kind of penetrating ordnance that would allow them to get it. And so Trump comes in and he used the U.S. military, which he really didn't want to do before that. And he saw how well it worked, and he saw how much it made him feel big and strong and powerful. So I think he was literally after that just looking for the next opportunity to go use the U.S. military to make him feel like a big strong man. I think he emulates Putin. He's all but said, I wish to be a dictator, right? I want to be able to do, and he said, I'm constrained only by my own morals, right? There's no process in the United States or international. And I think his own morals are all about the aggrandizement of Trump. And I think using military force makes him feel strong and powerful. And that to me is a very, very dangerous thing for the president of the United States to be looking for the next excuse to use military force because it makes him feel strong and powerful.
Well, in all honesty, as far as the United States goes, when we look at our history, we didn't like the president of South Vietnam, so we had him killed and another government put in place in the early 60s. We didn't like Salvador Allende in Chile, so there was a coup and he was taken out. We invaded the Dominican Republic. America has done this over a period of time. It feels different this time. I mean, if we're going to get mad at other political leaders and capture them and bring them to trial in the United States, I just don't know what the rest of the world is going to think of us.
Yeah, and again, you wonder when we did that before, right? And we have a long checkered history all around the world. And by the way, we're still dealing with the blowback from the Mossadegh coup in Iran that we were behind, right? The whole thing was designed to push back against the great communist tide in Russia and China and all the rest of it, right? And promote democracy. So we were putting Democrats in, right? Sometimes violently. El Salvador, there's a whole bunch of different places where we did it. But we had an ideology behind that, which is that we wanted to support democratic governments. We wanted to.
And is that the difference here? Is it the difference between supporting a democratic? So the way you've postured it, one way was we did it to support democratic governments. Let's take Chile, for example, as opposed to I'm trying to make myself look stronger and bigger and better, whatever.
Yeah.
Is that how you see it?
That's how I see it. Yeah, I see it as being ego-driven rather than ideologically driven. And look, I'm a liberal interventionist. I believe in the responsibility to protect. I think if there's genocide going on, the United States should step in and do what we can to stop it. I mean, that's just my own personal. But whether you subscribe to that theory or not, that there was at least a rationale for we didn't want Iraq invading Kuwait, right? Because we didn't want countries invading other countries, right? It was part of this rules-based system, and we were trying to keep the communists from taking over, right?
There's a moral underpinning here.
There was a moral underpinning, but there was also a pragmatic objective here. We want to push back on Russia. We don't want to let them, export this ideology of communism that's anathema to the U.S. Well, when we went into Venezuela, there's no rationale for it other than we want their oil. And in fact, we're dealing with the exact same regime we were dealing with before. Right. Trump chose Delcy Rodriguez instead of Mercado because he knew that he could work with her because the system was still aligned around her. So there was just no values behind that. There was no broader agenda pushing back on communism or anything like that. There was just Trump's desire to be a tough guy, to show that the United States had power, and to send a message that he was going to bully everybody else with the threat of military force to get them to do what he wants. What he doesn't understand, right, and this is what I learned working with Kerry, and I think this was Kerry's greatest gift. He was an incredibly talented diplomat, but I thought that his genius came from the fact that he was a politician, and he always understood every problem as fundamentally a political problem for the leaders we were working with. So he would always ask me, what is this guy's politics? Who's voting for him? Who are the stakeholders here? Who cares? Because every foreign policy problem for the United States is somebody else's domestic policy problem. So we always started with understanding what their politics were and figuring out how the solution we were proposing would help advance their own interests politically. Right now, I just don't think that there's any rhyme or reason behind any of this stuff other than trying to bully people into doing what we want. And what you learn when you do this job, when you're an actual diplomat, what you learn is the limitations of U.S. power. And that's a lot of what Kerry and I talked about in the class at Yale is we can't just wave our wand anymore. We don't have the ability to enforce our values and our interests around the world, except to the extent to which we are working with others to amplify and expand on those values. So now you throw that all out the window and you have and then you're left with what are we actually what are we accomplishing with the same exact regime in Venezuela? We're not getting any oil. We didn't need any anyway. So what was achieved here other than sending a message that we can bully other people? And once people start standing up to us and saying no, then Trump will realize that we can't actually follow through on a lot of the things and we're just left the United States with having achieved very little other than ranted and raved and invaded and sent our military in a few places and left us basically alone in the world, right? So this is, I would love to sit down and talk to some of those, because like I get the ego behind all this, fellas, right? But I'm just like, what are we actually getting out of this? What did
I
you
always
think?
thought it would have been a better argument for him to have said they stole our oil fields and we're taking them back. You can't steal from the U.S. I thought that was a better argument than we want their oil. But let's move on. There's so much of the world we still have to visit. Um, I think the American people were told by candidate Trump that the war in Ukraine would end in 24 hours. Now, I realize from reading the Bible that you can stop the sun and elongate days. That's happened before. But this has been the longest 24 hours in history. What's
Okay.
going on in Ukraine? And after you answer that, I'm going to pivot to Russia. So,
Okay.
let's talk about Ukraine first, and then let's pivot into Russia. I have a couple questions for you on that.
Okay, good. Well, I've said from the very beginning that the resolution on Ukraine cannot involve the president of Ukraine permanently ceding the sovereign territory of Ukraine to Russia, right? You can come up with some sort of de facto, well, we get that you're there, and we're not trying to kick you out anymore, particularly for Donbass region, but the idea that we were going to be able to force Ukraine to trade off its land to Russia in return for ending the offensive there, it just doesn't make any sense. Again, Ukraine can't do that even if they wanted to. Now, what you may get is some kind of an understanding that Russia will that those regions will be semi-autonomous Donbass region. Really, that's what Putin's main objective is. And by the way, in 2014, in the Minsk agreements, which didn't end the war so much as paused it, right? In effect, it was acknowledged that Russia wasn't going to be retreating from any of the places you froze funds. So you could do something along those lines now and get security guarantees in there for Ukraine. They don't join NATO, they join the European Union, and there is a resolution, but we can't force that resolution on Ukraine, right? No matter how much we may want to, we cannot force that resolution.
Well,
And furthermore,
can't we, I mean, they can't survive without our financial help, without our
not
military
true,
help. Not
not true.
true? Because of what?
Uh,
Because of NATO? Because of European countries?
Yeah, the Germans and others will step up, and we were on the verge of cutting off all assistance to Ukraine a
Right.
year and a half ago. I remember I had a meeting at the EU High Ambassador's house in Washington, and everybody went around. It was like at that point it looked like Congress. Mike Johnson stepped up and actually pushed through tens of billions of dollars of Ukraine aid that wasn't otherwise going to go anywhere, and so everybody was prepared. And I talked to the Europeans. I was like, "What happens?" Like, we'll survive. The Germans will have to put more money in, the French will have to put more money in, and but again, the way the battle lines work there, if you've actually, I find it fascinating to understand actually what's going on the front lines there, and there's some good places. It's really hard to gain any territory here, right? It's all drone warfare now, and
Right.
people are advancing, inch by inch over there. So if the United States stopped selling them weapons, the Europeans would sell them. Again, it would be a big step back, but it doesn't provide us the kind of leverage that would be required to get Zelensky to permanently cede these significant portions of the, and moreover, and this is the real problem in getting into Russia, Putin's not interested in any of this stuff, right? He thinks he's winning the war, right? And unless he gets like full title, he doesn't just want Donbass. He wants Odessa. He wants
He wants
acknowledgement
all of it. I mean, he
of
has the Crimea.
yeah. And so you have Trump and Witkoff, who I think is really doing his very best. And I've been in his shoes before. I was made the envoy when I had no idea what was going on. And it's like, it's a lot to take on. And you have the mandate of the president. But for him to try to negotiate a deal with Putin on Ukraine, I just think they're in over their heads on that. And they don't realize that Putin's not given any indication that he's interested in any of this. He's not interested in making any concessions at all. He thinks this war is working for him. He thinks he'll eventually get what he wants on the gun. So what is the leverage we have on Putin to get him to agree to anything? So to make a deal, you need to have two sides that are willing to compromise, because that outcome is better than than what's currently going on. On the Ukraine side, you're asking them to give up sovereign territory, which they really can't do. And on the Russian side, I don't think they're interested in any of this stuff. So we're having all these long negotiations, and I've done this, by the way, all these
Right.
long negotiations where you got one side to agree, and then you go to the other side, and they're like, we're not doing any of this. So I
Yeah.
don't think that there's any. I think that there will eventually could be a similar to Minsk in 2014. There can be a sort of freezing of the front lines and an end of the war. And I think the sanctions may be hurting the Russians over time and whatnot. But I think Putin will go until he feels like he's accomplished enough on the ground militarily that he can just hold on to that area. Because I think he knows that when the war stops, those battle lines will become the effective border. So I think he intends to continue to push forward as far as he can, at least to the edges of Donbass.
our relationship with Russia keeps changing. It's sort of a roller coaster. Sometimes Trump and Putin seem to be best friends. They're bros together, and sometimes they're enemies, and it's really hard to figure. I have to assume, and I think you touched on this a little bit before with NATO, that Putin must be just loving everything going on with Greenland and NATO, and America seems preoccupied with other places that we shouldn't be dealing with that are our friends, which means we can't be preoccupied in dealing with places that Putin cares about.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I think even more directly, NATO was set up to counter Russia, right?
Right.
And so if NATO is disintegrating, right, if the fundamental viability of NATO is called into question, that is a massive benefit to Putin, right? Putin and Xi were the happiest guys in the world, right? Because the Chinese can provide economic support and the trade agreements and whatnot that could sort of replace the United States to some degree. And you already have the Europeans going to the Chinese and going like, hey, so what kind of deal can we make with you guys? And then you have Putin, who's like would love nothing more than for NATO to disappear altogether. And we effectively, it was the ultimate diplomatic own goal, what Trump did in Davos this week, and handed a huge victory to Russia and China that they had done nothing to deserve, and that had no real rationale behind it. So I think Russia and China are empowered. We've all known for the last 4 or 5 years that they wanted to set up their own world order, right? A parallel world order where Western sanctions couldn't impact their ability to do business. So now they trade with each other, and they try to do literally just to separate. And by the way, talking about who has the majority, 70% of the world is probably on Russia and China's side in all of this, the whole global South. And we do nothing other than alienate everybody with the way we behave. And so they're gaining in power, they're gaining in, and you might look around the world and go like, wait, the United States really is alone. The Europeans hate us and don't trust us. And everybody else is happy to take the money China's going to give them and the support diplomatically and whatnot that Russia can give them. So I really think it's incredibly damaging to U.S. interests over the long term what's going on there now.
There hasn't been much discussion about China lately. I mean, they've sort of been out of it as we trip all over ourselves around the world. But doesn't the whole Greenland justification by the United States give China justification for Taiwan?
Yeah, 100%. They love it. Now they're like, oh, spheres of influence, cool. Knock yourself out. You got to take out the leader of Venezuela.
And what was that argument again? We're going to use that. Could you send that over?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the old political adage in America: when your opponent is tripping over himself, get out of the way. I think the Chinese are just like, hey, this is great. Keep on going. And by the way, we're happy to talk to you, Europeans or anybody else who wants to deal with a sane counterparty and all of this. So yeah, I think the invasion of Taiwan is tricky though. I don't think that's the Chinese mentality is not to take a big risk and go fight a big war, right? It's much more likely that they'll try to strangle Taiwan economically. They'll try to influence them politically. And I think over the course of the next 3 or 4 years, they'll try to get as close as they can to achieving their goals without actually invading, without actually destroying. I mean, they make the most sophisticated chips in the world inside of Taiwan. Like, you don't really want to start going and blowing everything up over there. So I think that they will try coercive means short of military force, but I think that they will be all the more empowered by the notion that the United States isn't coming to save anybody, right? And I think we call it strategic ambiguity around whether we would actually defend Taiwan or not. The answer was no, but we kind of said maybe because it was helpful as a deterrent, and now we no longer have that. So yeah, I think China will only get more aggressive in the South China Sea now than they were before. And that's a pick on someone your own size problem for Trump, is that we can't go fight the Chinese over there. We can't bully them. We can't intimidate them.
Too big.
They start doing whatever they want, because it's a free-for-all now. And they can just say, power is what matters. This is what Stephen Miller said. This is what Donald Trump said. Okay, so power matters. I'm going to exercise my power in ways that I felt vaguely constrained from doing before. So yeah, a lot of damaging knock-on effects of that.
Let's move on to the Middle East. You've referenced it many times. You're surely an expert. You spent a lot of time there, and you did a lot of great work. Look, thank God the hostages have been returned. Trump deserves credit for that. He's put forward a 20-point peace plan. Talk about the peace plan. Talk about where it is. Talk about where we're going. It has been a little quieter over there in the last couple of weeks. And why is that, and what's that mean?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would give Trump a great credit and Witkoff as well for having gotten that ceasefire done. right in January, and then the subsequent one. Biden was unable to do that. He just wasn't able to pressure the Israelis at all. Netanyahu had no respect for Biden or his
I
team.
was just going to ask you, is it because of Netanyahu's relationship with President Biden? Is that what the problem was? Or did he think he'd just wait him out?
He just knew that that Biden was never going to follow through on any of his threats, and so the Israelis just did whatever they wanted. And if Biden told them not to, they just did it anyway, right? It was we had almost zero impact on the Israelis' actions on the ground during the course of that war because Biden was never willing to stand up to Netanyahu publicly. Again,
Was that a political thing because of the Jewish support that the president has received historically? I mean, President Biden has been a strong supporter of Israel throughout his entire career. I mean, long before he was president of the United States, when he was in Congress and when he was a United States senator, he's been a very strong supporter. So, was it that he politically could not do it? He
Well, it
philosophically
was,
couldn't do it?
I don't think it was the politics cut both ways. And as we got closer to the presidential election, I had a good friend who was doing Jewish community outreach for the Harris campaign, and it was a zero sum game because there was a lot of Muslim voters, especially in swing states like Michigan, who were absolutely apoplectic about what was going on there. So it was a sort of I think the politics cut both ways. In my mind, what happened? Biden grew up in the Senate, right, and having spent many of my formative years there as well. You just get hardwired to support Israel. It's a
Right.
visceral reflect, and I think Biden had genuine love in his heart. He's a very loyal guy. He always loved Israel. So at some level, there was a political component to it, but also there was a visceral personal element to it as well. I'll tell you a brief story. We at the end of the Obama administration, we were considering the president was considering supporting a UN Security Council resolution that would declare settlements illegal, which is not really a contested point. But it was a question of, are you willing to fight Israel on this thing? And the president, I remember, he said, I find that whenever we go against our values, right, for political purposes, it comes back to bite us in the ass. And the only reason I can think of not to do this is because of the politics. This was right at the end of his term. One of the people that was arguing against it was Biden, right? And he said, hey, Israel is our ally. All anybody's going to do is remember the fact that you sold Israel out at the end after all you've done for them. And Obama was like, I'm president of the United States, so I don't care what they say. So this was deeply personal for Biden
Right.
as much as it was political. But at the end of the day, they had no ability to force the Israelis to do anything. One of the things, again, regardless of the administration, that I have a difficult time with is just seeing the United States get disrespected, right, and lied to. And that was really what was happening in my mind anyway during the Biden. And then Trump came in and he was like, first of all, he did the ceasefire in January, and then he did the final one, a month or two ago. And neither one of those things, in my opinion, could Biden have done himself because Trump could go not just to Netanyahu, but he goes straight to the Israeli public. Right, he was not dealing with the organ grinders monkey. Right, he was going right to the people that were calling him, which was the Israeli public. He knew Netanyahu was fundamentally political, and that Netanyahu couldn't afford to have a fight with him politically. And he
Right.
was more popular than Netanyahu. So he was able to effectively outflank Bibi on the politics of all this, and that enabled him to force Netanyahu to do something that he never wanted to do. Right, and moreover, I think Hamas threw in the towel on releasing the hostages, getting Israel only to withdraw from half, really less than half of Gaza Strip, because they didn't see that they were going to get anything. The hostages were dying, that they were sort of a diminished asset. And they were like, they wanted to sort of take the best deal they could at that moment. I think the Turks and Erdogan really put a lot of pressure on them. But what you're left with, Richard, now to answer your question, neither side agreed to Trump's 20-point plan. Right? They agreed effectively to phase one of his plan, which was the release of all the rest of the hostages, right, and bodies, and Israel moving back to those lines, right? And now we're into phase two, and everybody thinks, oh yeah, everybody signed on to the Trump plan. And they didn't really. And you have the Netanyahu government saying, hey, we're not doing, we didn't agree to any of this stuff. You got Smotrich and that gang saying, we're not allowing a international peacekeeping force in there. Like, how does that help us? We want to, honestly, like the Smotrich, the far right in Israel wants to kick all the Palestinians out of Gaza, which is why they love the Gaza Riviera plan, because in Trump's original plan, because in effect, their interpretation of it was it gave them license to move all the Palestinians out. And that's effectively what Trump had given them, his blessing to do. So I think you have those in Israel who still have that as their ultimate objective. And then on the Hamas side, they never agreed to disarm. Like, I don't know where that comes from. They didn't sign on to the 20-point plan.
It was in the plan. So,
Yeah, but
and Trump told us that.
they never agreed to the plan. This is what people don't realize. And honestly, Richard, even if I know this from years and years, even if you did, it doesn't matter. right?
Sure.
The piece of paper doesn't matter. It's only about what can be enforced. So what I see as the critical issue now is the disarming of Hamas, right? And that is something that we can all agree on wholeheartedly, right? Whether they have any capacity to threaten Israel or not, now probably not. But what they can do is build up their capabilities over time. They can start creating these weapons factories and start building more missiles. But what they can really do tomorrow is just prevent any kind of reasonable Palestinian government from emerging in
Right.
Gaza. Like if Hamas stays in control there, there's no hope for moving forward on any. I don't think there's a lot of hope anyway, but I just think the disarming of Hamas is not only in Israel's interest, it's in the interest of the Palestinian civilians who really have done nothing to deserve the horrible predicament they're in. So, yeah, we should disarm Hamas. But the idea, what Netanyahu is saying is, we will do nothing else in the Trump plan until Hamas is disarmed, right? And you're talking about, just understand, you're talking about guys with rifles, right? Who want to control the situation on the ground there. And there's other rival gangs there, right? So they're not going to turn their rifles in. The rifles don't threaten Israel. If you make that a precondition for moving ahead on humanitarian assistance, on reconstruction, on the International Stabilization Force, on any of the rest of the stuff in Trump's Planet 20, then none of it's going to move forward, and we're going to be stuck. So the question in my mind is Israel willing to be reasonable about the process of disarming Hamas taking place over time? They cannot threaten Israel from day one. Taking their weapons out of their hands as part of the DDR process or one government, one gun when the Palestinian Authority, but that takes place over time, and you can't stop everything else while waiting for that. So if the Israelis insist on that up front, then you know that Netanyahu just doesn't want to do any of this stuff, and he's using the disarming of Hamas as a pretext, right, to not implement any of the rest of it. And honestly, I think that's probably the most likely scenario. You've got the IDF now saying, maybe we want to go back in. Finish the job. You've got Smotrich and Ben-Gvir want to kick all the Palestinians out, and you got Netanyahu with an election coming up, right? So my guess is that this is going to remain. Trump doesn't want to resume the war because that'll make him look bad. He's owned this peace process, but at the same time, he can't really force either side to do anything they don't want to do, right? And so you're going to move forward in fits and starts, but effectively, this is going to turn into the de facto status quo going forward as Israel controls 54% of Gaza. I got a quick pop quiz for you, Richard. What percentage of the land between the river and the sea do you think is exclusively controlled by the Israelis? So I'm talking about Gaza, West Bank, Jerusalem, and Green Line, Israel. Overall percentage.
Is controlled by whom? By Israel?
Yeah.
Well, Israel is so narrow there. I'm going to go with something small.
So to the total land, all of it. West Bank, Gaza, the
whole thing.
I'm
going to go 26%.
But Israel controls 26%?
Yeah.
No. It's 91.4%.
That Israel controls. And I guess I thought of the question.
You got to flip around. Yeah. If you say 75%, that's a reasonable.
So you're saying that Israel controls Gaza, what they control in the West Bank, what they control in the land of Israel, that section from the land to the sea. Well, it's all theirs.
Whole thing.
Right. It's all theirs. There's nothing.
Except for the Palestinians ostensibly have administrative control over Area B in the West Bank,
they have Ramallah. They have other areas. 40%.
40% of the West Bank is controlled by the Palestinians. Even in theory, again, Israel controls all of it, but exclusive Israeli control. So the thing about the West Bank was the 60% called Area C was supposed to be transitioned to the Palestinians. After Oslo, with provisions made for settlements and security. But basically, and what they've done is they've reversed that process, and they've given all of that land over to the settlers. So the settler violence you're seeing in the West Bank right now, it's not a bug, it's a feature, right? It is, the plan is to drive all of the Palestinians out of the West Bank. And that's why you see these gangs of sort of,
which is why they allow settlements. Why they allow the settlements?
Yeah, but it's not only the intention there is to take all of that land. And the same thing is true of Gaza Strip. So if there's an organizing principle for how to understand what the Israelis are trying to do there, look at what they say, right? Which is the Knesset passed a resolution last summer saying every inch of the land between the river and the sea, Israel has the right to all of it. All of it. So they don't want any Palestinians there. And so what's happening in the West Bank, what's happening in Gaza, it's all of a piece. But the extreme right in Israel, empowered by Trump, is trying to basically take all of that land for themselves. So 91.4%. Guess what the
Wow.
population breakdown is?
Yeah, I see. I saw it. I looked at it the opposite way.
It's 50-50,
I
right?
saw
It's
it in
exactly the
reverse.
same
Yeah.
number of Israelis and Palestinians. Israel controls 91.4% of land. So how do you, if when you see that, and when you see, I've got some maps that I did for Obama that I've just updated now. When you see how this looks, you realize, wait, they're not leaving Gaza. They're not doing a two-state solution. They want all this land for themselves. And they say it out loud, not only out loud, but loudly. So take them at their word. This is what they're trying to do. So when I realized that was what was actually going on here, that they want to make life so miserable they can't sort of force all the Palestinians out. They just make life so miserable they hope they eventually just sort of leave, right? And that's Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And it's so anybody who tells you about a two-state solution, you have to reverse fundamentally what's going on the ground there. And you have to get an Israeli government that accepts the fact that you have to divide this land up in some form or fashion, whether it's a Palestinian state or otherwise. But if Israel is hell-bent on keeping all of that land for themselves, then it's just going to be an ongoing sort of nightmare for
Well,
them
one
diplomatic.
of the former prime ministers, I remember talking to Prime Minister Olmert about this years ago. He seemed much
I
more
love him.
willing.
He's a great guy.
I thought he was too. He was a wonderful man, and I enjoyed working with him. But he was more willing to come up with a real estate deal, I thought. You
Oh,
know,
100%. And
I'll
so
give you this back, you give me this, we do this.
well, so
So,
this the whole premise of the UN Security Council resolution. It's what Ehud Barak was willing to do. I'll tell you just very briefly. We had an incredibly interesting conversation with Shimon Peres. Carrie and I did it one day over like dinner, and he said two things that stuck in my mind. First was in the original partition agreement, we were given 56% of the land. After the 48 war, we had 78% of the land. That's enough. If we try to take the rest of it, we're going to be at war forever. And the second thing
right.
he said was, I had a conversation. He was reciting a conversation that he had with de Klerk at the end of apartheid, and he asked de Klerk, "Why did you dismantle the apartheid system?" And de Klerk said, "Well, we could withstand the security problems. We could withstand the financial problems as far as the accuracy. What we couldn't handle any longer was the moral stain, right, of
Yeah.
being." And he's like, when Paris said to Gary, "I'm afraid if we don't do some kind of deal with the Palestinians, that's where we're going to wind up as international pariahs." So I think of what Paris says, like, "Hey, here's a simple thing here, guys. 67 lines is 78% of the land. That seems fair to me." Right, and you do some
It's
land
happening.
swapping.
It's
But if you
happening a
want to
lot
take
of
the whole
places.
thing,
Yeah.
you're at war forever with the Palestinians, and you're going to be an international pride. That's a decision they need to make.
Let me ask you two quick questions, and you've been very generous. I don't want to keep you. Um, the Trump peace panel you referred to earlier, it seems to me like he's trying to create his own United Nations. France said no, Sweden said no, Finland said no, but the whole Middle East said yes yesterday.
Yeah,
Is that
why
what we're
not?
trying to get rid of the United Nations and create the Trump nations or whatever we're
Oh no,
going to
no,
call
no,
it?
no. It's not. That's not going to. That thing is not going to be able to do anything. Again, Richard, always ask yourself with these papers, these agreements, these organizations, what's the implementation mechanism here, right? So, what can they actually do through the Board of Peace? The answer is very little. I would have joined the Board of Peace too, not the Europeans, because Trump's behaved so badly with respect to Greenland and NATO and all the rest. But for everybody else, like, you have access to Trump. Like,
Right.
why not? I'll join
Yeah.
you. And like, maybe it helps me, maybe it doesn't. But I think that's a lot of sound and fury signifying very little.
Talk to me quickly about AI. Talk to me about, I know you're an expert on that, you're doing a lot of work on it. How does AI and the world order and what's going on everywhere around the world and what Trump is doing with AI, how does this all come together? What is the unifying principle here and what should we be thinking about as far as AI and world peace goes?
Yeah, well, I think it really goes to the core of the question we talked about at the top of the show, which is, what is this new world order? What does a rules based system look like? Because if it's every man for himself on AI, right, which is more or less the way it's going to work out, I think one way or the other, but there are no rules of the road on AI, and it's just going to be the countries that have the most capacity to develop it and the most energy to pour into supercomputers and whatnot, and so we will be advantaged by AI. What I'm concerned about is, if there is no global mechanism to put some rules around that, right, then it's just going to be a free for all where China can do whatever they want, Russia can do whatever they want, we can do whatever they want, everybody else is left beside. So you talk about the United Nations. What was it set up to do? To deal with transnational threats that individual countries couldn't deal with alone, like pandemics, right, or terrorism. So now you have AI, which is something that the world needs to come together and agree on some rules that will benefit everybody, right? And what's happened with what Trump's done recently is going to make that all the more difficult. And I think that's going to have profound implications. I don't want to get into a whole long thing about it, but the wealth disparity that already exists within America, but with respect to America and the rest of the world, is only going to grow. AI is going to exacerbate all of that by orders of magnitude. And then you have climate change coming up, and I just see the rest of the world getting left out and increasingly getting, the world becoming an increasingly volatile place as other countries around the world, absent any kind of rules, just start doing whatever's in their self-interest. And it's just kind of a free for all. So I'm hoping that we can come up with, even in the United States, we have no idea how to regulate this. Around the world, individual jurisdictions have no idea how to regulate it. So I just think AI happened really quickly, and people of our generation, Richard, I'll speak for myself. We don't really understand what it means, how it works, what is this thing. So you have an incredible amount of ignorance with a massive problem that nobody understands even how to talk about it, let alone how to fix it. So yeah, I think that's going to be one of the great challenges for America, for the rest of the world, in the years to come.
Well, Frank, we're going to have you on again to talk about all of this. So listen,
I didn't get into Iran, Richard. There's so much.
We have so many other things, but
sending an armada to Iran, so we could be at war again in a matter of days. Yeah.
Well, we'll have you on to talk about the Armada and Iran and how we're trying to scare them out and how we're supporting protesters in Iran, but not supporting protesters in Minnesota, and how that all balances out in the politics. But listen, you've been terrific. You've been very generous with your time. I learned a lot, so I appreciate it. And I thank you so much for joining us on Unconventional Times. And as I tell my guests, Frank, I know I don't have to tell you this, but I will anyway. Stay unconventional.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let me conclude our show just by saying this. At the start of today's program, I said that the world is on fire and that much of it has been caused by the U.S. lighting a match. And I think our guest, Frank Lowenstein, really went into that and explained state by state, country by country, how this is happening. We have insulted and bullied our friends, and we've made them feel badly about themselves. This is the opposite of diplomacy. Frank, worked as a diplomat with the State Department and showed us how diplomacy can work and how it can be successful. But we're getting away from that. There will come a day when we need our friends. We did it. We needed them in the Middle East. We needed them in Ukraine. We needed them after 9/11. And they won't be there for us because people don't run to help bullies and they don't run to help people who have insulted them and hurt them. They just stay away and they let the bully deal with it themselves. The United States and the world cannot afford that to happen. We need a foreign policy that speaks to the ideals of the American people and speaks to the ideals of this country. The Trump foreign policy seems to be a complete break with the former national policy, the old world order that Frank was talking about. It seems to be more speak loudly and hit your friends with the biggest stick you could find. That seems to be where our foreign policy is going. That is a prescription for disaster. Let me just close with one comment that has nothing to do with any of this, totally different. We saw the inauguration of two governors this week, Governor Abigail Spanberger in Virginia, Governor Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey. I attended Governor Sherrill's inauguration in New Jersey, and it just made me think while I was sitting there about inaugurations. And whatever political party you're from, whatever you think of the new president, the new governor, whatever, it is a moment of hope. It is a moment of renewal. It is a moment where our dreams can come forward. It is a time that we could dream big and think about making our country and our world and our states better. And that's what inaugurations are all about. And I was thrilled to be there with Governor Sherrill, listening to her comments and talking big, talking large about big issues that can be solved and help people. I wish them both the best of luck as they start their administrations. Maybe we'll have them on the show one day. But anyway, listen, thank you all for joining us today. You could hear us wherever you get your podcasts. You could watch us on YouTube at UT-Richard Gordon. That's YouTube at UT-Richard Gordon. And as we move forward, especially, be careful in the snow. I hear it's going to be really bad, but do take care of yourselves out there. And remember, stay unconventional. Thanks for being with us today.
You've been listening to Unconventional Times with your host, Richard Gordon. Check out all of the episodes of Unconventional Times on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Richard Gordon and all of his unconventional conversations, head on over to unconventionaltimes.com. Thanks for listening.